A Drought is a Drought by Bill Mitchell. This morning on the ABC AM program Talk turned to the problems that the ongoing drought are posing for the Australian rural communities. The Deputy Prime Minister, John Anderson, was interviewed and, as you would expect, given he heads the National Party, was extremely sympathetic to the farmers who are demanding more income support. Here is the transcript. Anyway, as I listened to it, became obvious that once again the politicians see misfortune in different ways, depending on which group is experiencing the misfortune. While not denying the drought is problematic for rural income generation, and understanding it is a systemic failure, too little rain, I also know enough about permaculture to know that current farming practices only worsen the situation that drought presents. In that case, while there is too little rain, we could easily blame the farmers for their lack of training and lack of endeavor to innovate and introduce new farming methods. If we then started to concentrate on that line of reasoning, we could easily start a punitive system of activity tests and other mean-spirited and time-wasting compliance requirements before we provided them with the New Start allowance. However, wisely, we do not resort to that sort of reasoning, and instead construct the problem as a lack of rain. I wish the federal government would develop an awareness among farmers of new practices which are more environmentally sustaining, but I would not want them to do this in a punitive compliance regime. In the AM interview, the interview was about the plan by the federal government to tie funds for water assistance to the states to the latter's willingness to comply with other federal demands. In gangster movies, we would call this way of doing business extortion. But I digress. So back to my story. The ABC interviewer, Alexandra Kirk, picks up the interview. Alexandra Kirk, quote, "Now, the next few weeks are going to be critical for farmers. If it doesn't rain, they're saying that they'll lose another winter crop. How quickly is the government willing to act?" John Anderson, quote, "Well, I think quickly, but I'd make this point. One of the reasons, and this is, I think, significant with your broader audience, it's terribly important to recognize that this has national economic ramifications as well. So I just make this point. If you like, on behalf of farmers, it's terribly important that we ensure the sector gets through this for the broader economy's sake, as well as for individual farm families, many of whom, as I think has been widely reported, are experiencing terrible suffering. I live with it. I'm out in rural areas all the time, and while there are some relatively fortunate areas, I have to say they're few and far between, and a lot of people really are experiencing stress levels that I think perhaps your listeners could best understand if they were to say, well, how would it be if instead of having an income for the last 4 years, every year I just gone deeper into debt?" End quote. Well, it is interesting how the government, and most nearly all the media, construct economic losses and suffering. This is a government that allows around 1.8 million Australians to have no work or less work than they desire. The government has perpetuated the inheritance it received from the incompetent last Labour government and the previous Conservative government before that. For 30 years, we have, on a daily basis, wasted millions of dollars of lost income because we have chosen macroeconomic policies that deliberately ensure there is not enough spending to generate the necessary jobs to fully employ the most disadvantaged workers in our communities. So when the Deputy PM says that we should do some role-playing and try to best understand if they were to say, well, how would it be if instead of having an income for the last 4 years, every year I'd just gone deeper into debt, then I would refer him to the unemployed, some of whom have been unemployed for at least that long. The only part of the experience they will not be able to easily relate to is that even though the government has deprived them of an opportunity to earn an income, they are unlikely to have gone increasingly in debt, given the asymmetries in the credit markets. Unemployed farmers facing a lack of rain can borrow because ultimately the government will bail them out, whereas unemployed workers generally facing a drought of jobs can never access credit to maintain their lifestyles. In the latter case, the living standards fall, the family often breaks down, and various other social pathologies drain the self-esteem and motivation of the afflicted. Of course, the government is so far off the mark it does not matter. In their ideological verve to get single parents, mothers, and disabled people running around in circles, called the job network, with the unemployed, they have decided to change the welfare system. Their so-called welfare to work measures in the budget, which are actually welfare to circus measures, are particularly repugnant. They are now about to get cuts in their benefits, around $22 per week for sole parents and $40 per week for DSP recipients as a result. It is also the case that the marginal tax rate on the lower benefits is 60% instead of the 40% on the former pensions. This shows clearly that the government is not even motivated by erroneous orthodox economic theory, which would predict this change would actually entrench people in non-work for utility maximizing reasons. Anyway, I should not complain. As a high-income earner, my marginal tax rate is down, and the high-income superannuation levy gone, and so 3 cheers for the government. Not. Anyway, I am sorry for often appearing simple, but the drought bit seems simple enough to me. A drought is a drought. Rain or jobs. Fortunately, a drought of jobs can be readily addressed through appropriate changes in government macroeconomic policy. A good place to start would be to introduce a job guarantee. If only.